Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we delve today into the issue of archetypes and branding, this is an issue that may, in the end, have had more influence on human activity, human attitudes, and behavior than possibly any other single aspect of our governance. And it's worth just contemplating for a moment as we begin our program today, the power of archetypes and the power of brand. Particularly when we think of the war in Ukraine, we think of the COVID pandemic, we think of the way that the media shapes public perception. We think of the way that we evaluate the news, the way that we start to sculpt our perceptions about the world, and the reality that we are being influenced in ways that we don't even know by forces emanating out of the corporations and our governments and special interests. And it was, in fact, just about 100 years ago, in the 1920s and 1930s, that people began to realize that the mass media could be used in a very specific, conscious way to shape a human behavior. And we have all been aware, because we've studied about it in school, how the Nazis, for example, through their propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, shaped public perception in Germany through the power of the media, through the power of their music, through the power of their marches and mass rallies, where they whipped up an entire nation into what Carl Jung called a state of mass hysteria. And that was shaped through propaganda, that was shaped by a very astute understanding that the archetypes that emerge out of the human psyche, which we're going to be discussing today, can be focalized into specific brands to both sell war, but also to sell products. Because there are certain psychic pathways, psychic triggers in our minds and in our hearts and in our emotions that if you can manipulate, you can get a person, most people, to do almost anything that you would like. And we've seen the power of the brand. We've seen the power of mass suasion sweeping the world. We're seeing it now with Ukraine, as the coordination of the NATO and US governments through the mass media has shaped a particular perception about what's going on over there. And that perception has been cultivated to serve an escalating war. And as you know, at Humanity Rising, we're trying to counter that brand. We're trying to counter that archetypal formation that's being consciously architected through control of the mass media. So even though we're going to be talking today more about how the corporations blend archetypal formations and branding, let us bear in mind that this issue is of crucial importance because we've learned a lot in the last 100 years since the psychoanalytic theories of Sigmund Freud about human beings and how we think, how we feel, and how we can be manipulated by forces outside ourselves that trigger unconscious processes to motivate conscious action. That's the power of archetypes. And that's the power of branding. So that's the subject that we're going to be diving into today. And it always delights me on Humanity Rising as we go into another little nook and cranny of the human being and the human heart and soul as we seek to bring illumination in this world of tumult and in this world of deep, deep contradiction, where many, many companies and functions are trying to influence what we believe and how we behave and what we buy. So before we delve into this very deep and complex subject, I want us to just pause, as we always do on Humanity Rising, simply to breathe together. Nothing settles the mind and the soul and the heart than just consciously breathing. So in a moment, we're going to hear the sound of the bell. When you hear the bell, just breathe in very slowly, about 5.5 breaths, and you'll hear another bell. Just breathe out 5.5 breaths. We'll take about 10 breaths together, and then we'll commence our program. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Humanity Rising. Let us breathe together. Thank you, everyone. It's always good to breathe as one. Just imagine if the whole world would breathe as one, consciously, coherently. We would probably come together and realize the senselessness of war, the absurdity of exploiting each other and our planet, and the ease with which, simply by breathing together, we would become collectively conscious of the ways that are available to all of us to be more compassionate with ourselves, compassionate with each other, and in alignment with the larger ecosystem of which we're a part. So that's why we breathe. It's probably the most important thing that we can collectively do in our world situation. Because the greater the external chaos, the more important the internal coherence. And that's why we breathe. So it's in this spirit of collective coherence that I want to introduce our speaker today, Yamilca Rodriguez, who was born in Venezuela and then came to the United States and got her BS degree in industrial design and then an MBA, and has been a guest professor in a number of universities in their MBA programs, and has been working actually for Procter Gamble for over 20 years in archetypes and branding. She is a PhD student now at the Ubiquity University. And when I was talking to some of our students the other day, just getting acquainted, as I love to do as the president of the university, Yamilca was on the call, and I was fascinated by her dissertation subject and invited her to come on to Humanity Rising, just to tell us about who she is and her pathway into exploring this vast domain of archetypes and branding. So, Yamilca, welcome to Humanity Rising. Thank you for joining us. And just take it away and tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and your story and what you're up to. And then we'll have a dialogue on the other side.
Great. So first of all, I want to thank you, Jim, for inviting me to this amazing community, and also Ubiquity University, which I found through a friend of mine. So I'm very excited to be in the program. So I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation, and then I'll introduce myself through the presentation. So here we go. Let me share the screen with you. All right, so the art of the brand. This is my favorite subject. And when I met Jim just a few weeks ago, I was really excited because he is, first of all, has so much knowledge, archetypes, that I felt like I knew nothing. But I've been studying this for about 20 years now, and it's just I live and breathe it every day. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my book and what it is to have a personal brand, because we all have one, whether you know it or not. Yes, there's products and there's other things, but you have a personal brand. And sometimes we do this unconsciously, and the entire intent of today is to bring it out consciously. Okay, so I'm going to continue here. I love this quote. If no one hates it, no one really loves it. I think, Jessica Walsh, I think this is so true, especially when we're talking about brands and design. We want to make things for everybody. We want to be good with everybody. We want to attract everybody. And really, the intent is to attract that opposite. And we'll talk about this. The intent is for you to be you, for you to be authentic. And to be authentic, we have to focus on who we really are without being other people, without copying others that we either admire or want to be. So really, this intent of being you, yes, will bring some haters, but most of all, it will bring lovers, right? You will know who extrinsically loves you and connects to you. And this is what this presentation is all about. So the overview today, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about the problem. I talk about fame here because I think fame is something we reject as people. And, I rejected it too at the beginning of this. And we see fame as something that is for celebrities or for musicians or for other people, but not us. And I'm here to tell you that fame is honorable. And we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward. I'm going to share the framework that I've developed. We're going to talk about fame and self-awareness. I'm going to share with you the methodology. We're going to talk about what is fame essence. What is that essence, that true essence? And then we're going to talk about fame character. Then finding your fame character. So we're going to do a little bit of a quiz at the end, and you're going to find out your fame character. And then working towards fame. What does that mean? What does that look like? And then obviously the ending, which is all about the thank yous for everybody here today. Okay, so a little bit about me. Yes, I call myself the brand therapist because a lot of times when you go and talk about archetypes and talk about yourself and talk about other people, you tend to know them a little more than they know or that they think you know them just because I know their archetype. It's like, how did you figure that out? Are you a psychic? And I'm like, no, I'm not a psychic. I just find out a little bit more about you once we kind of define your archetype. Yes, I did work at Procter and Gamble for 15 years of my life. And really was the ground. I always tell people that I got a PhD in branding at Procter and Gamble because I got to work with super, super smart people. And I got to travel the world and got to talk to different people around the world about products. And I was using archetypes for products. But when I left Procter and Gamble and I decided to start my own business, I thought, well, we should use products for people. I used to try to figure out what the character of a product was, right? Isn't it easier to find out your character, who you're all about? So we as people need to show our authentic self so we can connect and people can trust us. And that's how this works. Yes, my first business venture, I have to tell you guys this, was in fashion. I loved fashion all my life. I was never a fashion designer. I didn't study fashion, but I designed a line of skirts, which I still have in my basement because that didn't go anywhere. But so then I went back to my love of branding, but I just thought it was really interesting how we try different things in our lives. And I think that's important. And we find out what is right and wrong for us. I've been a co-author before, but this is my first published book on my own, which I'm really, really excited about. And as the brand therapist, I really just help my clients find out their inner essence so then they can create from an authentic place and really put yourself as an expert into it as a personal brand. When you own your own business, you are the brand. And so you have to know how to connect with other people and how the more that you show your authentic self, the right people come to you. So, and I'm going to talk a little about that in the methodology. And we believe that in this fame economy of today, and what I call the fame economy is that we are on social media today. And so, we kind of have a brand, whether we like it or not. And so in this era of social media, we all can become famous for our expertise, for what we are really, really want to be known for. Okay, so the first problem that we're going to talk about is how might we leverage archetypes in a world of ego. I had to put this down because as I was talking to Jim, he kind of posed this question around, well, if we focus so much on one archetype, doesn't that bring up the ego a little too much? And that was a really good question that I had to go back and think about. How does this work? And I think I have a way to talk to you about that. And the second problem is how might we leverage fame in the fame economy, right? In this economy that has changed for us forever, especially after COVID. We are more online. We are more, we connect with each other over video. So how do you want to portray your personality across the ethers? Okay. So fame is the perfume of heroic deeds, Socrates. This is where kind of this whole idea around fame came about, because Socrates talks about fame and how fame is actually the way we leave a legacy. So in ancient Greece, the philosopher Socrates famously declared an unexamined was not worth living. Unexamined life was not worth living. Asked to sum up what all philosophical commandments could be reduced to, he replied, know yourself or thyself. And so, yes, it's so important to know ourselves. And I think we seek that as human beings, right? What's our purpose? What are we here for? How do I know more about me? We love taking these quizzes, these tests that tell us a little bit more about who we are. Then the second one is the hard work starts with the mindset alone. And it's so true. As I have built my business, it has all been about my mindset around my worth. What am I worth to myself? What am I worth to others? How is my worth part of what I do? And the more we can figure that out and understand that we can have anything we want and understand how to change our mindset to accomplish that. And so I say you must work for and towards fame. So how do we do that? What does that mean? And how do we get there? So this is the framework. I want to introduce the framework a little bit. And what is this all about? These archetypes. I actually started looking at this from the book, The Hero and the Outlaw by Carol Pearson. And she has studied, she's a professor, and she connected with Margaret, who was a marketing person, and they wrote this book around how does archetypes and brand come together. Now, everybody in marketing and Hollywood studios, they use this methodology to figure out how to market you or a product or anything like that. So what we've done here is, if you look, I love talking about Carl Jung and all his theories, but archetypes are universal symbols and images stored in our memory bank. I like to use it that way because if you think about what Carl said, the unconscious collective is all about things that either are genealogical or past lives. We are born into this world with all this knowledge. And Freud's thinking was, we come into this world and as we experience things, that is what builds our life. It's through our experiences. So I love the way that Jung kind of framed it for us around, no, there's much more than just the experiences we have, but our past lives and genealogical and all those things that affect who we are as an individual. So really what I tell people, this methodology is about you bringing your unconscious self to the conscious. Okay, so we have 12 archetypes we work with. I'm going to start reading: lover, caregiver, girl next door, good guy, magician, outlaw, performer, explorer, hero, innocent, ruler, creator, and sage. And the reason why I have it in this circle is because there's 3 archetypes for each of the different axes, is the way that I work on it, because this framework gives us a differentiation and a positioning map at the end of the day. But the first thing that I love to talk about is the opposite, because we don't ever talk about opposites in archetypes. Actually, I don't think you'll find a book that talks about opposites in the archetype. And this is something that my colleague and I developed over our years together, is really looking at, if you have an archetype, what is that opposite and what does that mean? So each archetype has kind of like a kind of personality. So the caregiver is about service. The girl next door is about equality. The magician is about vision. The outlaw is about conviction. The performer is about joy. The explorer is about freedom. The hero is about courageousness. The innocent is about simplicity. The rule is about power. And the creator is about mastery. And the sage is about wisdom. So as we look at all these different ones, there's an opposite. So the opposite of lover is explorer. So what does that mean, the opposite? Well, the opposite is what I call your super fan, the people who really like you. You also like them. They're your opposite. Now, we do tend to attract likes as well, like other lovers, if we're a lover. But the opposite is what you want to attract, because these are the people who are going to rave about you. If you have a brand and you're in business, these are the people you want to attract. So you want to message to them. We don't want to message to every single archetype. We want to message to that individual. But the other piece is you only not need to understand you need to understand your opposite. And in that tension is where magic comes to life. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it as we talk through the methodology. So how does fame and self-awareness come together? So a lot of times as we get ready, either, to promote our book, promote ourselves, promote who we are, promote our business, we start putting all these self-imposed limitations, right? We have a heart, we like freak out and no, I don't want to put myself, this happened to me even with this book, like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Do I have the right concept? Should I even put this out there? Is this really like what I want to do? Like, do I want to put myself in the eye of others? I don't know. So that will always happen to us. But we ourselves put limiting beliefs or limiting limitations around things like, this is not going to happen, or this is going to be horrible. No, we have to think in a positive way and understand that these things will come up, but we as individuals have to overcome that. And so this is what really helps you if you own a business or you're on social or you're trying to promote your business or yourself. You really need to, the only way to grow exponentially is to show that inner self, because people want to know your story. People want to know what you're all about and who you are. So I want to go back to a little bit of the methodology. So what is this, fame method all about? What is this, what does this mean to me or to other people? So it's a systematic process to achieve brand excellence. The fame method includes understanding your fame essence, discovering your unique fame character, and delighting your super fan. What I call super fan, you can call it your ideal client, but really it's about not only understanding yourself as an individual, but also having that empathy for the opposite. Because when we build tension between opposites, that's where things start to become interesting. That's where things start to kind of have this energy that's beyond you. And so as we think about our own archetype, we also have to understand that opposite, that yang, or whatever that is for you, so you can make it more interesting, right? And that's what gives us a unique space as a brand position. And this is the way that we execute with excellence. And just, a little bit about how, when I started this is what really brings excitement to my life, helping people kind of understand their personal brand and then executing on it. At the beginning of my business, I was just helping people understand their brand, but they didn't know how to execute. Like, okay, now I know this, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, I decided to open up an agency because I didn't know that, because I understood this so well and I'm a designer myself, I knew how to execute on it. So really what I talk about is, how do you go from knowing to acting to taking action on your own personal brand? So let's go back to what I call the fame essence. Right. The fame essence is this foundation. I was part of a international women's event yesterday, and it's very interesting how, when we don't really understand branding, we kind of just try to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But when you understand your foundation, your grounding, or like I was telling them, like, think of a tree, the roots of the tree are really well grounded. This tree can, grow to be thousands of feet high or whatever, it's just a strong foundation is important even for a house, right? If you don't have a foundation, your house will fall down. So this fame essence is really about what are you from a foundational standpoint, right? What's your intrinsic nature? What determines your brand character? So our nature, I know somebody, Dahima, I was reading what she was saying as Jim was talking. And we're going from this mass denial to the true nature of who we are, of who we truly are. So your thoughts are catalyst for self-perpetuating cycles. Yes, that is so, we were talking about this unconscious thinking that we do to ourselves and these limiting beliefs. So if we say that we're going to be a failure, well, then you'll feel like a failure and then you'll act like a failure. And then which reinforces the belief that you must be a failure, right? But what if we turned that around and said, we're successful and we believe we're successful and then we are successful. So that is this limiting belief that we need to get rid of so we can go to our intrinsic nature of who we are and really get in touch with our essence, with our fire. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to this again because we're going to go into an exercise here soon around you finding your fame character. So, so we talked already about archetypes are kind of this universal model for behaviors and personalities. I think Jim was talking about this a little bit too, and the role that it plays on human behavior, right? I thought Ubiquity University was like the perfect place for me. Why? Because I love understanding human behavior, human beings, and everything you do is about you. I'm an industrial designer and a product designer. And I always tell my students, like, we design for humans. We don't design for a dog. I remember a student was trying to tell me, yeah, but we would design for a dog if we're designing for a dog. And I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, the dog is not buying the product. It's the human who owns the dog that's buying the product. And that's who you're really designing for. So really thinking about what is the human behavior? What is your innate personality? Who are you as your intrinsic nature is really what this is all about. Working with a personality of who you truly are is that essence of that piece of who you are. So like I said before, I worked the 12 archetypes through this book that I had read and really kind of the Hero and the Outlaw in 2002. I started Procter Gamble in 2001, and this was kind of like my life and loved the entire thing. And so I've kind of taken it to a different level and kind of really looked at the opposites and how that works. But one of the things here really quickly that I wanted to share that I didn't share on the past slides was that beyond the 12 archetypes, we have these different quadrants, and they're kind of shown here in color. So the lover, the caregiver, the girl next door, good guy are in the belonging quadrant. So think about that. They're really about connecting, human connection, and kind of that innate personality. Now, I will say we all have a little bit of all of them, but to really do the test as we're going to move this forward, think about what's your primary, the one that's the top one for you. So is your brand about, this relationship, this connection? Then we have magician, outline, performer, right? This is more of the dynamic. These archetypes are more, they don't care about structure, right? They're like moving targets, and they care more about change and transformation and joy and happiness. The next three are the explorer, hero, and innocent. All right. And these people are more about achievement, independence, and simplicity. So this is the quadrant that we call the independent quadrant. And then these three up here, which is the ruler, creator, and sage, that is what we call the stability quadrant. These are the individuals that need more stability. They need to know kind of like, what's the path? What am I doing? They're not really the individuals that are like, let's go for it. Whatever goes. So think about these in the quadrants, and I'm going to do the test in the next one. But that's what I wanted to share with you, because they also have these opposites, right? So the belonging, the opposite of belonging is independent, right? And then the opposite of stable is dynamic. Okay, so that's how these cross paths. And understanding your opposite and that tension that builds is what really gives interest to the brand. So let me go on to the next one. Okay. All right. So what I want everybody to do is, if you're watching this right now, we're going to do a quick quiz. It's only 2 questions, super easy. And really what I would like you to do, like I said before, is think about your primary top kind of personality trait. Okay. So is your personality, or is your brand, think about yourself, about belonging? We exist to bring people together, caring relationships and human connection. Or are you more about independent? We exist to chart new territory, ask tougher questions, simplicity, achievement, and independence. Or is your brand more about stability? We exist to bring stability and assurance to the world, control, rigor, and analysis. Or the last one, is it more dynamic? We exist to bring revolution and fun to the world, transformation, conviction, and joy. So what I want you to do is, don't think about it too much. Just pick, you might say, but I'm a little bit of this, I'm a little bit of that. No, I want you to pick your top one right now, okay? So just pick a color, whether it's green, red, blue, or yellow. Okay, going to the next one. Now we're going to go this by order. So if you picked green, I want you to select a quote. So if you picked green, are you beauty is whatever gives you joy, or I'll be there for you, or all people are created equal? All right, we're going to go back to this in a second. If you picked red, is it don't fence me in? Here I come to save the day. Keep it simple. Keep it honest. Now, I didn't put the archetypes in here on purpose because I don't want you to be thinking. All right, next one. Blue. Power isn't everything. It's the only thing. The best way to know the future is to create it. The truth will set you free. And the last one, if you picked yellow, where there's a will, there's a way, or it's my way or the highway, or if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. I hope you have selected yours. And we're going to go back to the green one. So if you selected one, and I'm going to read these to you, which I'm really excited. I have my little cheat sheet cards here. So if you picked beauty is whatever gives you joy, you are a lover. A lover sees beauty in the world and is attracted to things that enable them to experience life fully. Okay. If you selected number 2, which is I'll be there for you, you are a caregiver. A caregiver sees the need in the world and is attracted to experiences that make them feel needed and appreciated. If you selected number 3, you are a girl next door good guy. The girl next door good guy sees the world full of people and is attracted to things that enable them to connect, interact, and belong. Okay, so let's go to the next one. The red one. Okay, so don't fence me in. Don't fence me in is the explorer. An explorer sees an open road in front of them and is attracted to experiences that make them feel independent and free. The second one is here I come to save the day, and that is the hero. The hero sees the world as a challenge and is attracted to experiences that offer great opportunity to conquer, protect, and uphold. The third one is keep it simple, keep it honest. That is the innocent. The innocent sees the good and right in the world and is attracted to simple, easy solutions that renew and rejuvenate. So let's go to the blue one. Power isn't everything. It's the only thing. That is the ruler. The ruler sees the best in the world and is attracted to experiences that meet their high expectations. The best way to know the future is to create it. That's the creator. A creator sees the opportunity in the world and is attracted to things that enable them to build, prototype, and refine. And the last one here is the truth will set you free, which is the sage, right? The sage sees the world filled with information and is attracted to things that enable them to continually learn and gain wisdom. And for our last quadrant, we have the dynamic. Where there's a will, there's a way, and that's the magician. The magician sees the world as systems and is attracted to things that enable them to help, that will help them change, transform, and heal. It's my way or highway. That is the performer. A performer sees the world as a party and is attracted to experiences that help them live in the moment and enjoy life. And if I can't dance, oh, I did that wrong. So it's my way or the highway is actually the outlaw. Sorry about that. So the outlaw sees the world as something to disrupt and is attracted to things that offer intrigue, risk, and the opportunity to break convention. All right. If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. It's actually the performer. And that performer sees the world as a party and is attracted to experiences that help them live in the moment and enjoy life. So there you go. So before I end this part of my presentation, I just want to say, so what do I do with all that information? Right? So what you do is that you start building a strategy, a brand strategy around how you're going to execute on your brand, knowing your primary archetype. Now, this gets a little bit more complex because, like we said, we don't want to focus on just one. We have a primary, a secondary, and then we also want to look at the opposites, which is a primary superfan, a secondary superfan. But we can talk about that offline. And I think that, one more slide before I end. So what do you do with all this is what I said before, is you are consistent. Number one, start by defining your brand and yourself and be consistent. Show up consistently all the time. Visibility. Once you've defined your message, you must be as visible as you can with it. Now, don't be shy. Don't be hiding. Don't be going behind the curtain. You have to now be visible and show your brand to everybody. Frequency is the third one. So the third one is frequency is the third aspect of creating a personal brand. Decide and stick with it. Okay, so consistency is the first thing, then visibility, and then frequency, right? Consistency and frequency kind of go together because we have to do this as frequent as we can, but we also have to be very consistent with the personality that we bring out. So that is the end of my presentation. And I thank you so much for letting me share this with you. So I'm going to give it back to Jim.
Thank you, Yamilca. Thank you so much. I want to start by just asking you a little bit more about your personal story and what in your childhood or what in your deepest soul led you to such a fascination with archetypes, particularly in relationship to brand. Illuminate that for us for a moment.
Thank you, Jim, for asking that question. You know, one of the reasons I think as a child, I was very interested in how people thought, not just of me, but I was studying that from an unconscious standpoint. And my father, who was actually a professor, has a PhD himself in mathematics. He studied in San Diego. So we moved from Venezuela to go to San Diego. And I started to see that people were different in San Diego than they were in my culture, right? I came from an entire different culture. And so it was really, I started to learn that I was adaptive. I could adapt to these different circumstances that happened in my life. At the beginning, I was very angry with my father that made us move all around the world. But then I understood afterwards that it was actually a good thing for me. Then we moved back to Venezuela, to a different state, and started to see the reactions that my family had with the way that we dressed, right? We weren't allowed to dress in certain ways. And I started to see like there were different types of people. And I guess I was doing this all along in my different places that we lived. And then we went back to the US because my dad got a job there. And that was like Macomb, Illinois. Nobody knows where Macomb, Illinois is. So that was a different type of culture and different type of people. And then I went into Procter and got to travel the world and got to meet, got to talk to people in Singapore and in Brazil and in China, whether it was Beijing and Shanghai, and they were all different, right? The people who lived in Shanghai were very different than the ones that lived in Beijing. And then when I went to Japan, they were completely different, although it was Asia still, right? So that, I guess from an unconscious level, I was always studying that. And that really brought me to where I am today, and really using that for branding purposes, because branding is like this unconscious thing that we don't know what to do with, or we don't understand. And so how do you use your personal brand or your personality as a brand? And one of the things I remember, we were at, this is a little story. We were at work one day at Procter, and I was leaving the company, and I got this little cup, and it said like from Starbucks, and it had like, all these like how I would like my coffee, right? Or my drink. And it was like, 300 degrees, blah, 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 blah. They had all these things on me. It's like, that's my brand, right? You can't, and they told me like, you can't get off brand. You can't just order a regular coffee. Like you have to have all these criteria, soy and whatever. And at that time, so that really helped me understand, like, really a brand is a thing, right? You are your individuality. And the more you show that, people like know you, and they start talking to you a little differently because they know who you are, and they know what you like, and they know that you don't like this or you like that. So yeah, that's kind of my story around branding and personality.
Well, good. Well, let's dive in then. I think the first question I would have is around your selection of those particular 12, because obviously archetypes are almost innumerable. And there's archetypes that we don't even name, and there's archetypes that conflate with other archetypes, etc. So how did you choose those particular 12 personas? Because I think I wonder, given the complexity of the human being, whether that exhausts the possibilities, and whether many people would say, I don't really resonate with any of the 12. I'm feeling something else. I mean, does your system allow for that level of elasticity, or does 12 sizes fit all?
No, that's a great point. The way that we use the system is to really look at, there's 4 directions on human behavior, right? And this is a universal framework. And the four directions are belonging, independent, stable, and dynamic. So that's kind of the four major drivers of what I call human behavior. And so we put these, because there's 12, we put 3 archetypes in each of the different human drivers. And although, you might not find yourself, I think it needs to, the way this works, and that's the way I did my test, is for you not to think so much about the archetype itself, right? So I gave you like, okay, the 4 human drivers are those 4, and then I want you to pick a quote, right, that kind of resonates with you. And so, because I don't want you to start thinking, oh, what, I'm a magician, I'm a this, I'm a that, and so once I understand your actual essence, what I call the essence, and your human driver, and kind of where you stand, then we can expand on that and make it a little bit more around, because you also have a secondary. So it's not just your primary. And so we look at that, and we look at what quadrant you are, what's the actual positioning for your brand, and we kind of define it for you as we move along, because this is not a cookie cutter. Yeah, I'm an explorer, and I'm just going to act like an explorer. No, it doesn't work that way. The way it works is you get to define that for yourself, what that means to you, how you think about being an explorer is, and then we expand on it. And we use that to drive, personality or frameworks. So that's a really good question. It's like people, I this, like I studied Enneagram. I'm a strength finder person. I know Myers-Briggs, and everybody's always trying to say, but I don't want to be put in a box. Don't put me in a box. I can't relate to any of that. So it's really about just understanding yourself a little bit more with all these different frameworks, and then using that in a customized way to kind of bring to life and execute on your brand and your personality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gotcha. Because there are many different frameworks. Let's take, for example, the Enneagram. And the Enneagram is a cluster of 9, and has all kinds of lateral intricacies to that particular way of understanding the personality. But I think you're right. The 4 basic impulses that largely shape the construction of the personality are as you indicate. But I would, just to deepen this discussion for a moment, at 2 levels. One is the influence of the archetypes related to astrology. When we talked, I was talking about Richard Tarnas's masterwork, Cosmos and Psyche. And he points out that the position of the planets when you're born and their revolution at different times in your life influence you from the outside in with archetypal energies. So, for example, if Saturn has a major aspect with your sun on the day that you're born, you would tend archetypally, in terms of a brand, to be more conservative, more concerned with reliability, as opposed to if Uranus, the Promethean archetypal planet, has a major aspect with your sun on the day that you're born, you would tend to be more Promethean, more revolutionary, more kind of out of the box and creative. So I just wonder, in your work, do you use any of the available information about how the astrological archetypes are influencing the person that you're consulting with? Because the guy who came up with the collective unconscious and came up with archetypes, Carl Jung, said that astrology and understanding a person's chart was the single most reliable indicator for the personality construct of whoever it was that he was dealing with as a patient. So I'm just wondering how you integrate or not that reservoir of information on archetypes and personality into your work.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, when you brought up the book for me, I went and read it right away. And I invited my friend who's an expert in astrology because I wanted her to kind of explain to me how we could look at this, because she's the one who actually said, you're a brand therapist. And she's the one who kind of came up with this name. So it was really interesting to, just to listen to that book, how we look at cosmos or astrology as being part of this. Now, at the beginning of my work, I was trying to figure out how all the little things kind of fit into these 12 archetypes. Like, I was looking at crystals and kind of figuring out, what crystals kind of match these archetypes. And I was looking at astrology, and I actually went back and forth around some of the signs and like, is this like the sage, or is this, we were really talking through that, because I had a feeling that these things all come together as one. And as I think about my nature and my astrology sign, in my Enneagram, it's all like very well choreographed without me even actually doing that, on purpose. So for example, I'm a lover from an archetype standpoint. I'm a Pisces, very sensitive soul, right? I was born on March 3rd, which I spent without any electric here.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you. And then I'm also a 4, which is a very dramatic, kind of sensitive individual. So I think they all are connected. Now, your question is, have I done the work against that? I haven't done actual research. I mean, I've done a little bit, but I haven't done actual, the guy who writes the book research. But she did give me some understanding on how to use these goddesses in a way to look at goddesses in the framework of my when I was born, and how to look through that through space. And she actually had taken a class from this from the writer, and so I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, I might want to do that for my dissertation. I might want to take on this understanding of how this all comes together, because I believe that there's synchronicities, right? Like he talks about this in his book. And so I believe that I was driven to Ubiquity University and to you and to all these things to come together for a reason, right? And so why not investigate a little bit more and do some research around how that all comes together?
And just related, and then we'll move on to another domain, but I'm very interested in how you treat the shadow. Because every archetype has not only its opposite, but every archetype has a shadow dimension that interacts with the personality of the individual. And I'm thinking here of Gabor Mate. I just finished reading his latest New York Times bestseller called The Myth of Normal, which talks about trauma and healing in a toxic society. And he talks a lot, for example, about the caregiver. He says that our personalities are largely shaped by the way we internalize and adapt to trauma of childbirth, trauma of our childhood at the hands of parents or society, et cetera, et cetera. You moving from Venezuela to another country and traveling all around, you experience that as trauma at some level. And the way your little personality of Yamilca, 4 or 5 years old, 8 years old, shaped that, according to Gabor Mate, is as important as your astrological conditioning. So that when we come to a question that you're asking, or is it this quote, this quote, this quote, we're coming at it not only shaped from the outside in with the archetypal formations and impulses of the planetary alignments, we're also shaped by what kind of upbringing we had, what kind of circumstances in which we came into this world and began the adaptation. And what Mate points out, as anyone knows who studies Gabor Mate, a caregiver could actually be really somebody else, but realize that by becoming a caregiver, they could maintain control over the trauma that they were receiving from their parents or their school, et cetera, et cetera. And that became their persona. But because it wasn't really them, they're coming down with all these illnesses. And you can actually predict the illnesses, according to Mate, by the way our personalities adjusted to our traumas that became part of our character as we matured into adulthood. So I'm just wondering, in your work, how you, and when you sit down with a person, do you ask them about, their childhood traumas, and how that shaped who they become? Because these questions are gateways that you're asking people, are simple questions, but they're gateways to an absolute abyss of conflicting experiences, interpretive frameworks, astrological conditionings, responses to trauma. And then you ask them, which of these three quotes do you resonate with? Well, maybe on a Monday morning you would resonate with one, but after you've had a really good day, you may resonate with others. So anyway, how do you navigate your way through that complexity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And again, this is why I call myself the brand therapist. And as I was, had more clients and had more business and was talking to a lot of people and doing these question and answer and figuring out their brand through the archetypes, I found a lot of things, obviously. And I have a lot of trauma, like you said, and I spent most of my time kind of talking them through how that, not that I really wanted to go there, but it just, you just go there. Like you said, you're opening up this box of feelings, I guess is how you would say it. And really trying to help them understand why, these things happen in their life and why, they might be attracting the wrong individual in the way that they're perceiving themselves, right? Because it's like a lot of people actually, when I tell them their archetypes, some of them, it's like they reject it, right? They reject it. They're like, no, I'm not that. What are you talking about? But as I get to know them more, I start to understand why they reject it, right? And understand the intricacies of trauma in the other people in their lives, like their mother, was this kind of caregiver person and kind of took them over, and that kind of traumatized them, and that's why they couldn't really bring out this essence that they had, this piece of them. And so, and I experienced it myself, right? As my primary archetype, I'm like, the lover is not smart enough. The lover is not, and so we all experience kind of these rejections of our archetype. It's our nature. And like you said, the shadow side of it, like, what are we hiding? What are the traumas that we're not bringing out? And this is the reason why, as I was doing more of this work, I was like, where did I get myself into? Like, I'm just talking about brand, like how now am I getting into these, conversations and these traumas? But I decided to get certified in neuro-linguistic programming, timeline therapy, and hypnosis. to really help people with that trauma piece. And actually, I had a client yesterday that I was going through some of the neurolinguistic timeline therapy pieces, because she has this very, trauma that I can't help her anymore from a, superficial branding standpoint. We need to get a little deeper to get rid of those limiting issues that she can't come out herself with. Through timeline therapy, neurolinguistic programming, and hypnosis, I can help her kind of get those shadow pieces, because she's actually using her archetypes, shadows, as her defense mechanism on how to reject things, right? And so, yes, there is a lot that starts to open up when you go deep into the understanding of these things, and a lot that comes up on the individual, and a lot that you as an individual have to prepare yourself for, and get some more tools to help your clients. Because when I talk about fame, that's a whole other thing, right? People are like, oh my God, I can't go out there, well, show myself. And so really getting deep and helping them through those trauma with some of these tools that are a little bit more accelerated, can really, I've seen a lot of benefit to that essence. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that come up as we look at, our, experiences, the people who we grew up around, and all those things. Yes, they're all part of who we become. And so we have to take those things apart. And a lot of my work is not just executing or showing some pretty pictures, but it's a lot about, being able to internalize and understand those things that come up for you, and how do you, not completely resolve, but how do you start to understand how these things start to become something that you actually want to do more about and learn about yourself more, to I don't know how we would talk about this, but not like to put the trauma out there, but more like to understand and be more self-aware about these things and what happens to us when we hear those things.
Yeah, how our brand is a function of our response to trauma is a brilliant illumination when it shines upon your psyche. And so that's a deep work that you're doing with people. So let's turn to this issue of fame, because I think that triggered a couple of comments in the chat, and I think it's worth delving into both the concept and the word fame. I'm thinking of the great line from Alexander the Great, that it is a good thing to live with courage and to die leaving an everlasting fame. And as you were pointing out in the Greek etymology of that, that was about glory and honor. That was about living your life so that at the end of the day, you were recognized as great, either as a hero in battle or in any way that you distinguish yourselves in your life. Because in the end, you wanted to leave a legacy of fame by people remembering you as a heroic or glorified figure. And yet many people would say that is the problem. That is our problem. There were two comments I just wanted to share with you just to get your response. One from Kim Kerrigan, who has a essence of a quote from Jung, that the way to the light is making the darkness conscious. So it's the self or service. It's not about fame. And I think that's worth contemplating as to whether the real impulse here, is it fame or is it a deep authenticity of being, where fame may or may not be what happens to you, but the quality of your life in terms of finally becoming who you really are and who you were born to be. Is that the goal? That Jung would say that the goal, he wouldn't say it's fame, he would say it's the self. He would say that when the ego rests within the larger self and the archetypal alignments in your personality that integrate you to the larger world are in harmony, that is when you know yourself really deeply and maybe for the first time. And then Marta Prado says, how can we brand ourselves without nurturing our self-importance and succumbing to an ego trip where it's all about me, me, me? Because that's sort of the essence of Americana, and consumerism is the preoccupation with almost a narcissistic obsession about how we represent our persona in the world. And we get caught up in becoming things that aren't truly ours, but are designed for public consumption and actually serve to alienate ourselves from ourselves, rather than building the deeper authenticity that would say, fame, no fame, that doesn't make any difference in my life, because I'm here for a deeper purpose. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because I think that is something that some people have noted in the chat, and I think is something I'm sure you've thought about it many times, but just would love to hear your general response.
Yeah, two great things. So I'm going to start with the word fame, and then we'll talk about what you said about how do we think about it through not I, right? So the fame one, first of all, is when you look up the word fame, not a lot of positive things come up, right? Some very negative things come up. And so that was interesting, even to find, different quotes and different things. But the reason why I kind of use fame was also it's a very fascinating word, because either people reject it like instantly, like I think somebody had written on the comments, or they are like, yeah, I kind of want to become famous. That's interesting. Like, what is this about? Right. And so the reason I liked that contradiction that the word fame had, and again, the way that I use it is kind of like how I started the presentation. We are living in a fame economy, whether we like it or not. So COVID kind of put us in this a lot faster than where we were before. We have, anybody can be on social media now and, have their opinions kind of front and center. So why don't you do this in a way that it helps others, right? Becoming famous is not for the few, it's for the many. And it's the fame word for me is more about leaving a legacy or leaving an impact than actually just becoming famous because you want to become famous, right? It's more about what do you want to leave a legacy for? What do you want to leave an impact about? What is something that's bigger than you, than bigger than your purpose in this life to be part of? And I think that word fame, I know that, you look at people who are actually famous and they might not be doing a lot of good, but how can you use fame for good things, for things that are going to leave an impact for people? Now, the other piece of how do we not, be I driven is the way that I use this is a lot of people aren't showing their true selves. So the more that you understand you as an individual, and now some people might go to the extreme of this, but the whole purpose of this is not to focus so much on you, but to focus on the person who you're serving. That's why I make so much of an effort to talk about the opposite, right? Because when you're all about you, you forget about who is this other person that I'm trying to attract. And yes, it's important to be your authentic self, but how do you serve this individual? And it should all be about service, right? How do we serve that opposite? How do we think about what their needs are, not what our needs are? What are their needs? You can't have a business if you're not serving your customer, if you're not in service of your customer or in service of your employees, right? Because that is what gives you credibility, sustainment in your business. And so this tension that I talk about is really, it can't happen though if you don't know who you are and if you don't know who this other person is. And really understanding the symbiotic or the connection between the two is the primary thing. Like for me, understanding you is to really understand your client and how to serve your client, how to make them happier, because the happier they are, the more business you'll have, right? And so it's not to focus so much on ourselves all the time, but how do we focus on that opposite and understand that other individual and have empathy towards the individual? You know, I did a whole talk on empathy. And when I was researching empathy, I found that some people aren't born with empathy. Some people don't have empathy. And so, but you can practice empathy and gain understanding of it. And so I think a lot of us have a hard time putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes. And so that's really what this is about. How do we put ourselves in our opposite shoes and understand them? Because we want to build things a lot. That's why I love what I do, because my whole business is built around helping you as an individual. Not you have to do what I do. You have to do it the way I did it. You have to do it this way. It's for me really understanding you and serving you and creating your brand and making you the center of the universe. So we can once we understand that, then how do we focus on putting ourselves in the other people's shoes? Because a lot of times when we have our own business, we're like so focused on how we do it, how we are, how we don't care about anybody else, right? But if you don't have that vision of that person on the other side, your business is not going to withstand. So this entire work is not about just understanding your essence or you. It's about understanding that other individual, that other person, and being able to see things from their perspective, not your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect. You know, you have to love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. Just to take up on one point that you said about empathy, my sense is that I'm not sure I would agree that some people are born without empathy. I think all of us are born naturally empathic and empathic. But I think our traumas cause us to repress it in ways that negate it as a behavior and attitude, as we realize that our repressions serve as a survival mechanism in a traumatic world. And I'm following Gabor Mate here because he has a whole discussion on empathy in his book. And he argues, and I think I agree, that we're all born connected with the mother. We're born connected with all that there is. And we learn over time as we suffer trauma that, oh, wait a minute, I can't say this, or my father's going to hit me. So we begin to repress who we are and develop mechanisms of behavior that ensure our survivability. And sometimes that includes repressing our own natural tendency to be empathetic, compassionate, and sort of available to people. So I would wonder why you would say that some people are born without empathy. Do you believe that's really true?
Well, as I was researching, there was this in Psychology Today, there was an article talking about all these studies they had done and how there were some people who didn't show any empathy. I but what they did say that I think is really important here is that anybody can learn to be empathetic. It's like you don't have to, even if you don't have it or you had trauma around it, you can always be empathetic. You can learn to be empathetic. So I think that's the really important piece there is, but I think a lot of times we have, some of us, maybe because of trauma, have a harder time with this. I do a lot of this whole piece around customer experience. And if you think about customer experience and their phases, it's all about how do you nurture that relationship with your client. And I think a lot of people just don't, they want to throw their understanding to people, but they don't take the time to look at it through a different lens, right? You have a harder time to look through a different lens for you to really make these steps something that people want or need. I guess because I'm a product designer and I shared all my products with consumers to try to understand, their feedback. It wasn't about what they actually said. It was about how they interacted with it, right? So sometimes we just hear and we don't look at all the pieces that we have. And when I wrote my book and I looked at the archetypes, it's not just about that personality, but it's about the senses. It's about the music. It's about, using each sense to bring out this full scope of this individual, because it's not just the color. People think, oh, just a color. This is my brand color. And I'm like, that's not enough, right? You have to have the 5 senses and exploit that and really think through not just you, but how other people look at it. And I think sometimes we're so stuck on how we see things that we can't look at how others may see them.
Yeah. Well, I think this brings us to a final domain I'd like to take up, which is the insight that you have about the importance of the opposites. And Deanna Rice is asking a good question here about the opposites, and is the opposite perspective understanding bringing the whole self forward to integrate. And I think that's a profound notion that Jung obviously spoke very deeply about, because he said that it's not unless and until you can bring the opposites in your life and in your personality and your character, which includes the shadow, into a whole. And it's the whole that he understood to be the self. And in the middle of it, our little ego, which has been shaped by trauma, shaped by astrology, shaped by all kinds of things, is trying to navigate through a thicket, but motivated by self-interest and just basically surviving. We have to survive the traumas of childhood. And then all of a sudden we realize through some experience, a mystical experience or a trauma, that there's a bigger whole that is available to us. And I want to not only have you comment on the importance of the opposites, but on Jung's insight that which leads us to integrate the opposites is the feminine.
Okay, love that. Okay.
It's the feminine that enables men and women to integrate, and that's the mother, and that's the container. So it's an experience of the container of the mother that enables us to hold the opposites in attention, because if we can't hold them in a creative, holistic intention, they destroy us.
And you're right. Like, I love that, because I'm already starting my second book, and it's going to talk mostly about opposites and what I call the super fan. And as I was using this 12 steps of story from Joseph Campbell. And I don't know if you've looked at that, but I use that to write like the outline of my book, because it gives me a storyline. And as you go through the 12 steps, I think step number 9 or 10 is the reward. But step number 12 is the elixir, right? And so as we go through this, if it's all about understanding your opposite or your super fan, the importance of that, but really, really, it's about understanding the whole. That's what it's really about. The reward is, understanding the opposite, but the elixir, the ultimate understanding, is the whole. And so, as we were creating this methodology, we were also thinking about, okay, the purpose is to understand your opposite and fully, integrate that. That's how we get to purpose in a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so really getting to purpose through understanding your essence and going towards the opposite is really how we would kind of integrate a whole self into this. But when you talk about the feminine, and I love that, and this is the piece where I think I think some of these series could kind of integrate more is I was, and you remind me of this when I was when you were talking about the mother. I went to Mexico, Merida, in November, and I asked, why is there a woman on that picture? And they said, this is la madre patria, which is the mother, patria is like the place where you live, right? And so that really hit me strongly, and it's, for them, it is the mother, it's the feminine, right? Although it was a guy talking. And even though, in Mexico, there's a lot of macho men, right? But it's about understanding the mother and the feminine. Exactly. And then that's the entire scope that you are, because the feminine is what really helps you integrate all these things, and that connection and the wholeness and the womb, right? We're creating this womb, and I think it holds all that space and all those things that make us who we are. And so as we come out of the womb into earth and live our lives, and get all this trauma and all these things, and then we die, right? We were talking about just earlier, like, we don't want to die, right? We want to live forever. But as we get older, our whole purpose should be around, okay, how do we go back to the wholeness of the womb? How do we come back to our feminine? How do we integrate this life and make it bigger than who we are in our purpose?
Beautifully put, Yamilca. Thank you so much. You're taking on, as a therapist, massive issues when you try to integrate archetypes and brand and self-exploration, and the archetype of reaching through the embrace of the opposites, a larger whole. You're taking on a large aspect of the human journey, because it encompasses us all. It's so amazing that we're born from the mother, and we get traumatized and then think we're separate. And then in the end, as we wake up and embrace the opposites that have conflicted our lives, we return to the mother. And that's the path of individuation, and that's the path of wholeness. And I would just say, everyone, as we close here, that one of the reasons why we invited Yamilca on is that a major theme, as you all know, for Humanity Rising is, how do we, in this time of real turbulence, how do we care for ourselves? How do we know ourselves better? How do we fortify our inner equilibrium? That's why we breathe every day. We're just trying to provide a practice where we can all, just for a moment, for 10 breaths, just sink into a deeper sense of who we most essentially are. Because in the end, all exploration is really a remembering of our origins. And Yamilca, through archetypes and branding, has discovered a pathway that you may want to utilize and make available for yourself. So thank you, Yamilca, and your due honor to us at Ubiquity University by being part of our doctoral program. And I look forward to talking with you. I'll be sitting in on your oral exam when you finally submit your dissertation. So I look forward to that. So that brings us to a close, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link that Stan's putting in. Yamilca said that she could join for a bit, so you can have a deeper dive with her. And then tomorrow, we're going to be talking with Steve Lloyd, who's the founder of Physical Health Sciences, who has come up with a product that he believes can extend human life. And so if you're interested in living a little bit longer, Steve Lloyd has come up with something that he believes can assist you in doing that. So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. Thank you, Yamilca. Brilliantly put. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.